great pleasure now to introduce Joel Glende, who is the EVP of Manufacturing Membership for the BSMA. And I'll turn it over to him and allow him to introduce his panel. So Joel, take it away, please.
Thank you, Dave. First, welcome everyone to our BSMA Logistics virtual event. Our panel will address the logistics impact from COVID-19 on our life sciences. Today's focus is going to be understanding the impact and possible logistic solutions in the wake of the pandemic that can benefit our life sciences. This Zoom event from BSMA demonstrates our global commitment to partnership with its members and colleagues desiring to better support our industry. We are ever mindful of how many human beings have suffered with COVID-19, and now even more, our commitment to patients' lives is here at BSMA. My name is Joel Glende, a BSMA executive and longtime, for those that know me, longtime logistics professional, and so glad to be your host and moderator for today's panel discussion with fellow industry experts. Our agenda is very simple, yet interactive. Each panelist will spend about 7 minutes on their key topic area to allow for follow-up questions and interaction. During the discussions, you in the audience, I ask and need 3 things from you. First, your undivided attention for the next 45 minutes. Yes, I know what you're doing in the background. You have other applications going. Please silence your phones. It's worth it. These guys have spent a lot of time on this, so I think you're going to enjoy. Second, be thinking of questions. Even if we can't cover them today, we will address them and post them in our website. And then lastly, future participation in whether you're in manufacturing, in logistics, or a service provider, we embrace new talent at BSMA. Please, again, please submit any questions via your chat tool, and we'll get to them as time allows. Now I want to introduce our panelists, our execs here. First, Peter Dorr. He's a director of international distribution from Abbott in Wiesbaden-Delkenheim, Germany. Jeff Tucker, who's our CEO of Tucker Company Worldwide, based on the East Coast, I believe Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Lorant Kovacs, who's head of Schenker's Americas section of healthcare, and I believe he's located in Atlanta. Marrie Groeneveld, he's a CCO of SkyCell, that's based in Zurich, Switzerland. And Gary Hutchinson, president of Modality Solutions, I believe he's up in the Dallas area. So with that, let's go to the content. Since we met last year in person in San Francisco, just think how much has occurred. Our time today is going to be focused on highlights from our panelists and challenges on the immediate horizon known. The COVID-19 landscape has changed our logistics and transportation. It's impacted the life science company businesses in many, many ways. I'm going to be asking each of the panelists to remark on how their companies have adapted to these turbulent times. And first, starting with Peter as a manufacturer. We've assumed, first of all, that the passenger cargo capacity would be re-injecting into the networks, but as everyone knows, that hasn't happened. For you now, how has this influenced access to temp-controlled infrastructure so far? How are we approaching any seasonality issues, challenges in air freight, the COVID vaccine campaign on the horizon? How's it going at Abbott now, Peter?
Okay, probably I start with this very brutal situation that from one day to another, you had an empty sky. You were sitting on a daily 14,000 parcels. A huge amount of them are basically cold chain products which go with passive coolers, and you need to ship them into 170 countries. I felt very strongly reminded to the only 6-day long empty sky during 2010, where the Icelandic volcano brought all the air freight, at least in Middle and Western Europe, to stop. and we basically reminded ourselves to that time what was things we have done. Clearly, as colleagues mentioned before, we have a good BCP plan, but this was definitely an event which outraced everything what was in our imagination. So basically, given an empty sky today, we find the capacity we need. We still have some white spots where we need to go strange routings, and I'm relating my comments here, first of all, on air freight. We pay still abnormal high rates. I remember that going to Australia 2 months ago, it cost us probably 6 times of the rate we normally had to pay. We are still slower than what customers are expecting and used to before the pandemic outbreak. But right now, we get things lifted. Everything what could be done is now basically going ground. Time-sensitive products, short-dated material clearly needs to go on the sky. Alternatively, an ocean container isn't something. So things are in direction of normal, but still we are by far not where we have been till January this year.
Very interesting. And also setting the stage on our road freight discussion and on the European road transport. How has Europe adapted in the supply chain execution, and both between manufacturing sites, I know very well from my Abbott days, and on the commercial side to end customers during this period? You know, there was a lot of end customer, we call last mile challenges throughout the region. How did it go in Europe, and how has Abbott adapted? And as Jeff Tucker's going to be talking on the US side, be good to understand how you've leaned on your service providers in these challenging times. What are your thoughts on this, Peter?
Okay, probably not the very brutal break, because clearly you have much higher opportunities and offerings and flexibility on the ground. We still had a very difficult and permanently changing landscape. We had border closings. The same day, we basically had a full truck leaving our facility, going into Czech Republic. We didn't know really what was the precautions, what was the requirements, special health certificates for the drivers. We had basically queuing. We switched immediately, even if we had an ambient transportation overnight, to cooling trucks. We basically moved material into hubs where we were certain that from there onwards they would, on one hand, stay in the right condition, and we could basically also use alternative drivers or companies. We have moved from direct shipping, very often sky forwarder usage on the ground, onto a line haul system where daily we had trucks leaving to have really everything under control. We babysitted every shipment, every parcel. We interviewed even truck drivers to really figure out what is the current border situation to get our material to customers. We worked very closely together, on one hand with the Abbott own people, specifically customer service organization, to figure out what might be things coming up, and very, very important, trustful relationship with our forwarders and suppliers. I heard this also in the panel discussion before. That was definitely, for me, the key of survive. We have certainly a long-term relationship with a lot of service providers, and those basically were the ones, I would say, which helped us during tough times, and also brought up solutions on things where we were really having stuff sitting there and risking to basically lose a full truck load of material, which is quite expensive, or basically going over the 72 hours, which our passive containers are normally lasting without any intervention. So those were things where I would bring it to basically relationship, changing, routing, exchange experience, talk also outside our normal scheme of transportation to us as service providers. And probably another one, which I forgot to talk about in the air freight, we moved away from a single shipment of a ton of 2 tons to could we basically get a full charter by grouping up our demand with others. And this helped us specifically in the Asia Pacific area to get material there.
Great, Peter. We'll get to that with Lorant on the air dynamics, we'll call it. Yeah. So this is good. Jeff, where the rubber meets the road. This is where we're really leaning on you, Jeff, to help us understand this better in the U.S. and maybe contrast a little bit with what Peter was talking about, Europe challenges. But on the U.S. side, with all our volatility that we're seeing in a number of modes of transport, how has this affected the trucking side of it, whether it be full truck, LTL, long haul stuff, or last mile? Please walk us through this, please.
Sorry.
No worries.
I just unmuted myself. Okay, thanks, Joel. I think trucking has gone through, I've said it before, but trucking has seen essentially a century of U.S. history, right? Just this year. We went from, the toilet paper runs just before, just at the outset of the lockdowns. Trucking was in a boom. It's the Roaring '20s. The Spanish flu, the Spanish influenza was the corresponding impetus, right? And then you had the Roaring '20s, and then you went into Great Depression. Trucking was in a really bad place after the first few weeks. You saw, and it was in the USA Today and popular media. Trucks parked in, as close as they could to the White House, complaining that there's no freight and they needed assistance and help. Not unlike what the airlines received. And then we began working ourselves out. So we went through that Great Depression, and then really there was about 22 weeks straight where the demand for trucking increased week on week. And there's a Freight Waves, and many of you are familiar with Freight Waves if you're anywhere close to logistics. Freight Waves has a lot of data that come out. One of their products is sonar, and it helps you understand where the hotspots are in the country with demand pricing. One of the data that they sets that they show is tender rejection. So shippers who have a number one on their list to move this particular customer's freight, they're tendering a shipment to a carrier. Tender rejections, as recently as a few weeks ago, were at 25%, which is an historically high level. So 1 in 4 shipments were being rejected by the primary carrier. Things just got so hot. We're right now, Morgan Stanley, the investment bank, Morgan Stanley does a truckload freight index, and they look at different kinds of trucks. And the one that I'm referring to is the reefer or refrigerated trucking index. We're at like the 2nd or 3rd highest demand in history, and since they started looking at this in 2004, and rates have corresponded in that increase. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. New centralized drug database has moved a lot of drivers out of the industry. COVID has moved a lot of drivers out of the industry. There's estimates I've heard from large carriers that 100,000 drivers who would have been trained earlier in this year weren't able to be in the same cab as their trainer, so therefore they were way behind in new drivers. And also the economy just got so nasty in April and May that it may have caused those drivers to park permanently or semi-permanently. But that's the greater industry, the greater trucking, and I ended up with the temp control, because temp control, if you think of a pie chart, and the previous presentation just before ours really got into this in some of the level of detail and complexity that I'd like to just touch on or just build on. But if you think of a pie chart, temp control, it's maybe 10% of the whole volume that this country moves. We've been moving, we're a non-asset based third-party logistics company. We move freight transportation, we arrange freight transportation, never owned a truck in 60 years. So we select carefully. Out of that pie chart, out of that 10% roughly of all trucks that could potentially handle temp control, we've got like 40 maybe tops carriers who we would trust with pharmaceuticals. So, a pie chart of temp control looks like a sliver. You can't even get a slice of pie out of the darn thing if you think about who would you trust and who can actually move pharma. And then with, the temperatures that you're seeing, really only ice cream moves at 20%. I'm exaggerating. So there's exceptions to the rule, but ice cream is like the thing that moves at 20 degrees below zero. Most temp control is not in that frozen, ultra frozen space. So you've got all kinds of limitations here. And I know that that's some of what we're going to be talking about, but the other thing is, I just mentioned just a minute ago, demand is at all-time high, or second, third highest in history for temp control. In order to move the temperature control, whether it's ambient or cold, other products are going to have to be moved to the side. Other medical products, food products, frozen products, and those customers or those manufacturers are not going to go quietly into the night. So each truck today is dedicated to moving freight. And there is no such thing as setting aside or guaranteeing volume. I've heard that comment a lot by manufacturers. Oh, our carriers are committing volume to us. You really have to understand, you have to really unpack that, totally get it, totally understand it, because I've heard that lots of times in my 30 years, and that doesn't exist. It can, but you really have to know what you're talking about. Most of the times I've heard that phrase thrown around, the house came falling down. So it's something to really seriously consider, I think, as we move forward, is that I think that every trucking company, every company like mine wants to be involved in this, because the humanitarian effort, everyone wants to have play a part in in helping. But a concern that I have is, we talked about transparency in the previous session. We moved 1,000 truckloads, roughly 1,000 truckloads over a 3-day period a few years ago. It took us 6 months to plan that with the customer. And it went off flawlessly, but it took 6 months to plan it. And we knew where the origins and destinations were going to be. Nobody knows anything right now. So I have huge faith in all of our abilities to get this done. But I also have the practical experience of having, moved heaven and earth before, and done, Mission Impossible before. And I just, again, to build on that previous, the last presentation, we need transparency. We need some sort of organization, and Operation Warp Speed. I think they need to have more service providers who are specialized in this space to be advising them at this stage, because you got the White House and the CEOs of these manufacturers talking regularly. But I'll point out something that maybe we don't point out often enough. Publicly traded companies stand to gain stock value, reputation, being first. And maybe there's not such a willingness to share some of the information that we all need to share. Maybe there's not as a willingness to share the transparency. I don't know that for sure, but I hope that's not the case. And I feel like we need to be far more transparent and begin planning now, because it only looks easy.
Jeff, I really agree with you on this. And to get us into the, present and future on this, what are you saying shippers can do in light of this capacity crisis that already sounds like it's with us, and we haven't even hit the first horizon of actual deployment of COVID. Kind of help us understand what, not only just the impact, but on the demand, what are things that key shippers are going to have to do to partner with the trucking industry to really be successful in vaccine deployment?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm speaking as a third party. I believe that, I said earlier that, I get really concerned when I hear shippers say we've locked down capacity. I've seen that before. That 1,000 load project, there were 3 companies that were supposed to have locked down capacity for that, and 6 months in, we're good. Can't come the weekend of execution, and it didn't look pretty at all. And they weren't able to live up to what it is that they said that they were going to do. And what do you do at that stage? You can't do anything at that stage. You just suck it up and somehow get through it. So I think the best thing that you could do is, again, speak to your providers, give as much information as possible. As a non-asset based, I know that I can make trucks grow on trees, whereas a large asset base may not be able to. They've got a certain number of trucks, but even I'm not a magician. I'm exaggerating with trucks growing on trees, but I can get capacity, but I have to know something. Something is better than nothing. Advance notice is better than last minute notice. Involve us early. I understand from dealing with some of our clients in this space how busy they are just trying to maybe, get this, that, or the other thing aligned, but you have to start talking to the providers. And we just have to be planning for something. Even if things change, we get that. We're in that business, but we need to be planning for something.
Great feedback. And it's so true. This is where the rubber meets the road is exactly where we see all the areas of weakness, and appreciate your feedback. We'll come back to you, I'm sure, in the Q&A. But now I want to go back up to air freight and 30,000 foot and for Lorant Kovacs with Schenker, and really trying to understand, freight capacity, demand fluctuations, all the different things. Lorant, the dramatic reductions in capacity was really evident, and please help us understand, describe what it's like today in more detail, and how shippers have been successful in life sciences. Also, any signals or solutions with vaccine deployment when it comes to initial wave, and also kind of help us understand, on the temp management side, what you're seeing out there today. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you. First of all, good afternoon, everybody, or good day, wherever you are around the globe joining us. Glad to be here. Joel, I think there's a lot to unpack in your initial question statement. So I will try to bring that 30,000 foot view a little bit closer to you and to everyone. At DB Schenker, our mission is for the vertical market healthcare is to provide logistics execution with patient safety and well-being at the center, while ensuring product integrity using enhanced end-to-end visibility and standardized processes in a worldwide network. Now, all this comes together in helping the industry to succeed throughout the COVID crisis and the challenges that the industry has faced. So let me talk about a little bit how the capacity overview really evolved in the past 6 or 7 months. So at the height of the COVID disruption, back in April, really, as Peter said, the capacity evaporated overnight almost. So we have seen 2010 levels of hold in available capacity of the belly aircrafts. These are the intercontinental aircrafts that you and I used to travel on before. And so 70% was completely gone overnight. Now, what we have seen as our industries are extremely resilient, We have seen that the freighter capacity, on the other hand, has been ramped up, and we have seen a rise of about 20% really throughout the months of April, and that really helped the healthcare industry, the pharmaceutical industry to keep on moving their supply chains, and also in addition to support everybody on the front lines with PPE. So we have done a lot of work in that ourselves, and what that resulted in is that we have seen really just a dip. When I say just, it's an understatement. 35%, about 35% of capacity not being available in the market. Now, there is an association, IATA, which is the watchdog of the industry, and they have really done some good work in looking at the numbers and how capacity moved. So fast forward to August, what we have seen is a little bit of a normalization. At the same time, I like to call out the numbers because they really don't look all that different from April. And that is a challenge that I want us to be all aware of. So back in August, the passenger capacity that we all used was still only at 60% of pre-COVID times, and the total available capacity with that 20-30% surplus with the freighters that have been installed into the market was still just about 30%. So 30% capacity available from pre-COVID times. So that has provided extreme challenges, as Peter mentioned. Now, why is this crucial? Now, as we talk about the solution that we are all awaiting, a possible COVID-19 vaccine, when I look at the market and what's happening in the space, I see somewhere around 140 candidates today that are in development, and out of these 140 or close to 140, 6 have limited approvals. Now, when I look at the challenges of limited approval, and that ties into what Jeff called out, and I want to echo that, is the uncertainty that we really don't know what type of vaccine and when it's going to be released. And that is crucial because such an undertaking, echoing Devandra's intro, I think, comparing it to the moonshot, is really challenging, and having some sort of an idea when to prepare the market and the capacity to help to deliver this is crucial. So with that said, and with the lack of information, I think another complication that we have seen, and I was really interested in what Paul was saying about McKesson's experience with the N1H1 distribution, because what we know in the public domain that is available about the COVID-19 vaccine and the temperature requirements seems to be that they are sub-zero, minus 20, deep frozen, or even ultra frozen, so below minus 20 degrees when it comes to transportation. Now, that is a whole new level of complication when it comes to moving volumes. Just to put this in perspective, in a typical influenza season in the United States, we distribute, we as a community distribute about close to 200 million doses of an influenza vaccine. Now, as we know, just with Operation Warp Speed, I think we're talking about around 500 million today that has been secured by our government. So that's more than double, which is definitely going to provide some strain on capacity access, capacity availability. Now, and on top of that, I think the challenges of cold chain and managing the transportation and the distribution of that is going to be something to watch out for, because really today, when I look at the infrastructure that is available, we all have been very well experienced in transporting cold chain, transporting other vaccines, transporting pharmaceuticals in a 2-to-8 or a CRT or an ambient environment. And really, all the participants in the supply chain have geared their infrastructures towards that. And so there has to be a shift maybe towards additional infrastructure that can support distribution and temporary storage in a deep frozen or an ultra frozen environment. And last but not least, I think an additional vantage point that I want us to think about, and when Peter mentioned and recalled the volcano eruption, the Icelandic volcano eruption back in 2010, really I looked it up, and that disruption really only lasted about 2 weeks, and it was rolling throughout various European countries as the ash cloud moved around our globe. So that 2 weeks of disruption, what it has created, and I remember those days, was an extreme fight for capacity, and also resulted in an eruption of pricing. And when I contrast the undertaking that we are about to embark on, and also still trying to keep other supply chains going, not only auxiliarily, so that supports the entire healthcare industry, but also other industries, FMCG, automotive, or high-tech industries, I do sense that there might be a greater challenge ahead, something like we have seen back in 2010. This all depends on the timing, and this all depends really the transparency that we can get up front as logistics service providers to help and plan together for that. So really, I can only echo what also Devendra said, that and many before me, that collaboration and partnerships are going to be key to get through this together.
Absolutely, Lorant. Thank you very much. Great comments. And I want to transition to Marrie, because SkyCell has perhaps a unique perspective, but the challenges nevertheless in packaging engineering. I spent 15 years in it for Abbott Laboratories. The challenges are daunting. So Marrie, with our air capacity disrupted supply chain that's been described here, how have temp control container providers helped the biopharma shippers adapt in this? Different processes, outside the box thinking, without compromising compliance. What are you experiencing now, Marrie?
Right. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the panel, Joel. Having said that first, well, I mean, what have we seen? I mean, the first couple of weeks from, we call it the crisis, the crisis that we are still in. I mean, nobody really knew what was going on, and everybody just behaved and did the best they could. But in a sense, I think we should also be a bit, maybe be thankful that it happened, because we learn from it now. And what we have learned over the last, let's call it 5, 6, 7 months now, I think that is what we should be using somewhere next year, and preparing for that when the other wave that we are coming, we see coming at us, called the COVID vaccine, to get prepared for that. There's a lot of learnings from that, and sometimes we start to sound like real estate agents, where only 3 things are important, and that is location, location, location. And I think in our market, there's 3 things that are important. That is collaboration, collaboration, and collaboration. And that is also how we handled the beginning of the crisis. How we actually looked at our partners, and that is the first part of the collaboration that we have set up. And we looked at our partners and also learned that this is not a commercial thing that we were facing. This is a high need for solution, and that brings a completely different perspective in the relationships that you have. Right. So one thing that we're in the logistics industry, and I've had a 30+ years background in that. I mean, we are also used to live in a sort of a world of uncertainty with very footloose type of structures, and I think that is something that we have learned. That is something we cannot, in order to solve the crisis we have and meet the challenge, that is something we cannot, that will not help us forward. So, what we actually did was we looked at our partners, and our partners being there's always three in our pharma container industry. It's first of all the manufacturers, the airlines as the second, and the forwarders as the third group. And we looked at all groups together, and we said, okay, but what can we do? We know there is a bottleneck, we know there is a limitation, but what can we do? First of all, we also saw, by the way, that in the first month or a couple of months, we saw there was a bit of a hesitation on the manufacturing side to actually to provide any planning, because nobody knew. I mean, there is no comparison, there is no history. So how do you plan? How do you do it? What we have seen, and that is something we have learned, is that there is a big shift. There has been a big shift towards charter business. So we also provided solutions to our clients, together with the airlines and together with the forwarders, to still move their products on charters. I mean, full 747s, etc., and to and from Europe. We all think that it's only coming from the US or from Europe, but it's also coming into. So that is one of the things that we implemented together with our partners. And what we've also seen is, and that is something we have learned, and we are currently implementing in order to meet the challenge for early next year. That is we call that the options, where a lot of the manufacturers and also some of the forwarders actually put in sort of a reservation just to make sure that they have a certain capacity available. Because what we do with that is that if you combine that, this is in preparation for next year, when you combine that with the partners on the airline side, you can organize very fast turnarounds, and that takes away the bottleneck. So that is something that we have learned. We have been.
Marrie, can I just pause you for a bit, because
Sure,
I want to go back to robustness in packaging with Gary, because I think it's good to get back to that, and then we can come back with Q&A. Gary, with your company's experience in the development of packaging systems for Ebola, please compare and contrast how our current vaccine process differs from Ebola in terms of temp control packaging systems. And then if you get a chance, how will vaccine deployment for COVID impact the shipping industry as a whole, mass deployment of packaging systems? Your thoughts on this, Gary? Perhaps unmuted.
Thanks, Joel. I think the difference there was a lot of great lessons learned in the Ebola breakout as far as some of these next generation vaccines that are coming. I think there's a general realization, at least on the manufacturer side right now, that these deep frozen vaccines, primarily around the RNA-based vaccines, are going to be particularly challenging to deliver on a massive scale. There's a model that we helped put together in the Congo and some of the other Sahara African countries on how to do vaccine deliveries with these multiple temperature ranges, but they really were on the scale that's being contemplated right now. So we're working with our manufacturers, and we're working with several of the manufacturers right now, is this realization that they're going to have to do something on supporting temperature ranges other than deep frozen. And I think what's interesting to us is that's already in process. We've been working with some of the COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers are already recognizing that the early distribution is going to be a challenge with the deep frozen, but going forward, they're going to need to have different temperature ranges or longer time out of deep frozen to actually do the delivery process. So, it's very interesting to hear on the collaboration side, and I think it is, it's been 10 years now since I've been managing logistics networks for a pharmaceutical manufacturer. But 10 years ago, carriers were talking about collaboration and communication and planning, and it seems like a lot has changed. But I think there is this realization from the pharmaceutical companies that there are significant challenges with these newer vaccines, and getting them delivered in a deep frozen state is really not going to be sustainable over the long term. So they're already working on ways to take some of these vaccines and extend their stability profile to see if they can ship at different temperature ranges. How long can they be once they're reconstituted? How long can they be at the refrigerated state? For example, when in 2015, when we were doing this in the Congo, once the vaccine was reconstituted, you had to actually have it dosed within 24 to 36 hours. And that type of window is going to be very difficult when you're looking at the number of doses and just how widespread it's going to be right now. So I think the industry or from the manufacturer side, they're beginning to recognize that these are the challenges that are out there, and they're working to try to widen that temperature window, and also take a look at, is there a way to different temperature ranges, different durations, and still confirm the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine itself.
Great, Gary. I'm seeing we just have a few minutes left, and so we will address all the questions that were posted. There were quite a few out there, and I just want to leave with the concept. Phase one, I think we'll have no problems initially because there's military support and things. But what we really need to understand is how are we going to get vaccine out to the masses, and that's why I'm so grateful to each one of you for taking time today on our panel, because I think when we look at this, we do need to collaborate across industry and look at best practices. And one of the things, I'm offering up is that our team at BSMA, and I'll facilitate this, we will have a monthly roundtable discussion. I know Devendra is going to support me on it. But we can, throw the topics out there when we can get at the granular level on some of this. So I think it's very important for the industry. I think we've got tremendous expertise globally on this, and I love our global panel that we have, because they're looking at things in a multifaceted fashion. And as we look at COVID and other types of things in the future, we really want to concentrate on learning from the past on this. So not just thinking about it, but putting it into logistics action, because I'm very confident we can execute to whatever the needs are. It was a great warning that we had. So with that, Dave, I'm even giving you another minute, Dave.
Well, thank you so much, Joel. What an excellent, and as you can tell, we can talk forever on transportation, and as usual, what an excellent discussion, and we will get the questions out. Joel, thank you so much. It gives me